One, they are not delivering their services, because the services to the people which we are paying them every day for, because they don't have the capacity. And two, they are there leeching what are they there doing? They're there finding money of how to survive. I think it's a freebie, it's a win-win, and if they don't go on their own accord, then they can be taken to prosecution. My suggestion, it will change the civil service.
Yes, I was going to talk a little bit about the corruption, but as you said, we are part of the whole thing. I think it is important in the aspect of corruption that we can't just resolve it in terms of salary increase. I think it's a whole attitudinal change that pervades the system. And it's not only in the offices, even at the village level. You will find the alkali trying to get something. You will find the party limit. So it's so endemic that it's something that needs to be looked at profoundly and develop a way and means of changing our attitude. And that, again, brings us to knowing what has preceded, because there's been a major disconnect between what preceded and what Yajame left. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. The privilege, finally. No. So the quick question is, when you started addressing, what do you call it again, the security reform, you used the term that's very dear to my heart, which is right-sizing. But then when you guys were addressing, and maybe it's implied, when you were talking about the civil service, we talked about reduce people and savings. Let's be careful. When you're trying to do reform, you have to really find out what the problem is. You get to the root cause of the problem, and that's the right sizing you mentioned. You need to, before you right size, you need to go and do, find out what the issues are, because right sizing is not just, you may not have savings, right? Because you may have to train some people, give them different skills to go somewhere else, because it's bloated here, but you need them somewhere else. So I think we just need to be careful about that. And something that we are not very good at, and to be considered, and if you do the right thing, you'll find out that we need employment development. I'm an employee, I'm here. I have no clue where I'm going next. I have no training plan to say, in the next, if I keep doing this and performing up to this level, I'll get to here. So, and it may address some of the corruption, it may not, but it should be a multi-pronged approach. And then I think our brother Flex mentioned the certificates and stuff. We need to set standards, because we can go and review the certificates and they're there, but is there a mismatch in skill and certificate or not? We need to set that standards. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to comment on this corruption issue. I just have a little story to tell you. I think the Chinese wall was built around the 11th century or something like that. The Mongolians were attacking. They built it just to defend the Mongolians, because they were afraid that the Mongolians will attack them. What happened was the Mongolians continued to attack them, and the Chinese were worried what was happening. And they realized that the guards were allowing the Mongolians to come in. So it's about character. Corruption is about character. It is not about money. Money is not a satisfier. The more you get it, the more you want it. So I think we need to look at, and I like the Tanzanian approach. We need to go and do a radical surgery in such a way that to save our country. Because the way they were recruited, it's no fault of theirs. Somebody who could not pass the exam, and I went into a meeting and I heard this question. Somebody who could not pass the exam, he was helped by a permanent secretary, somebody who was in the ministry, and later that man was appointed the permanent secretary over that person. Can you imagine this? So these are things that we need to do. And I said in our group, of course they lectured me there on these things. We are making a major assumption that these things will be taken into consideration. But we must have the leadership to seriously look at the recommendations that will come out of this meeting.
But I just wanted, I know it's not my turn to speak, but I just wanted to say, and I just hijacked it. It's the American way. We do things our way. Yes. Oh. But as you know, we're talking, and I just kept thinking, what is the foundation upon which our public service is built in this country? That's what I keep thinking about. Because I know in the US, our public service is built on honor, right? Because out of this honor, you have ethics. That's why we call up the judges your honor, because it's a privilege. So I just keep wondering, what is the foundation upon which the civil service organizations in this country, our civil service sector rather, is built on? What is it? I think if we can understand that, then it's better. I mean, there's a lot of things can come out of that, but we need to understand the foundation upon which we are building the civil service.
I think I can attempt to answer that question. The foundation is service.
Service on what?
Service, servicing the people. Anyway, I'd like to talk a bit about corruption, actually. I think I'll apologize in advance if this seemed to offend anybody. But I think since independence, since the PPP government, there has not been any serious attempt really to fight corruption in this country. We never had a strategy, a formula to really fight corruption. And for me, one formula that we could use is the EIP formula. One is education. Because many people are corrupt, they don't even know that some of the things they are doing is corruption. I've talked to people who tell me nothing is wrong with me going to China to represent Gambia government and I'm giving a gift and I take the gift as my personal gift. That's pretty okay. We have a president who will collect money from people he calls anonymous donors. Use that money to buy vehicles for lawmakers, and yet he and those lawmakers think that nothing is wrong with that. That's a big problem. We need to do education. Two is incentives. We need to provide incentives because you have a police officer whose salary is $2,500 and he buys a bag of rice for $1,600, is only $900 remaining. And anecdotal evidence suggests that you need at least $13,800 to survive in urban Gambia. Rents have skyrocketed, transportation has gone up, petrol price has gone up, cash power is expensive, school fees, food, everything is expensive. Now you pay that guy $2,500 a month. So deficit is about how much? $11,000. How does he get it? Obviously from where he's working. And this is causing problems. I mean, you see a police officer will let a truck pass, a truck with no headlights, with no back, with no brakes, going to kill a whole family just because it's receiving a few $100s. So then the third one, the final one is punishment. So if we educate, still you are corrupt, we give you incentives, still you are corrupt, then for me it's punishment. I mean, we need to be serious. We need to really give hard punishments for that. Now coming on to the... which?
No, corrupt. But those, the justification you ask for the police, what about those who don't earn anything? Like who? They have a family, so they should keep.
No. I'm not saying that. I'm not.
You are justifying corruption because
I'm not justifying it. No. I'm not justifying it. I'm not justifying it. I said we should give incentives.
Incentive should be limited to only those who are working.
Obviously, you work to receive salary for your work. You cannot be sitting at home and then we give you a salary. I'm talking about public officials. I'm talking about public officials in this view. However, the other issue about the public service, especially civil service, is that we are not service oriented. There is a lot of poor work ethic in this country. The Western world are a couple of 100 years ahead of us. Sometimes I joke that if I travel 5 hours from London to Banjul, that 5 hours journey is transporting me 200 years back in time. They work 24 hours a day around the clock. If they're not in the office, they work online. I could go on a Sunday afternoon and apply for an ID card or driver's license online. Here we work only 5 days a week. In these 5 days a week, if a civil servant is supposed to work, let's say 35 hours a week, based on slippages, he does only 12 hours. He'll come to work at 9 because transportation systems are weak. He'll come late. First thing he does is go down to get breakfast. Yes, breakfast, he'll have 10, 11, he'll come to work, then ditch. Ngente. Before 2, they've gone. So, and then Friday is a half day. I mean, we cannot really be serious to develop if we really work 12, 13 hours a week average for every any civil servant. So for me, I think these are things that we also need to look at. Finally, on the security sector reform, for me, I think the best security sector reform we can have in this country is to invest in people, especially young people. And I agree with I think it's Dr. Fango who said about, or Senghor, about people, young people. We are heading towards a demographic catastrophe if we don't know it. Today our population is 1.8 million. This will double within a generation, and over 60% will be young people. What are we planning for them? Are we planning jobs for them, housing? Are we planning youth development centers for them? Our education system is in shambles. What are we going to do with all these young people who are growing up in urban Gambia? And recently, Afrobarometer data tells us that rural-urban migration has increased. However, international migration has decreased. But the reasons why the young people migrated still remain the same. Poverty, lack of jobs. It's a ticking time bomb. And these are very serious things. And the final thing also is the environmental catastrophe we are heading in. Homer Dixon told us that future wars and future conflict will not be based on ideologies or anything, but what? The environment. And we are really abusing our environment. Today we are living very dangerously in this country. Everything we do here depends on outside forces. The agriculture, they have to be bought by outside forces. They control the prices. Tourism is dependent on outside. A single terrorism scare in this country will drop tourism. Remittances. Somebody mentioned it here. We will send money. My children who are born in the UK will not send money because they don't know that culture. These three things, our economy depends. If it stops, the country will collapse. I think it's high time for us to really start considering the future of this country.
Yeah, in terms of security reform, I think we have to build a democratic security. And like I said yesterday, unless people understand the value of rights, we'll have a problem. And as we said in our session, to me, human rights is as important as the food that I eat. Because without human rights, I would have a problem having food. So we have to inculcate that in our people. But I think one thing that happens, when we talk about corruption, we are always one-sided. We are always talking about the receivers, we are not talking about the givers. Most of us here have no problem bribing somebody. No, waji harama dankalali rek dama yakamti. That's, you know, we have an enabling culture. That's how we enable dictatorship, and that is how corruption has been enabled. Even when you talk about the amount of times that we work. I get to work. When I worked here in the Gambia, I was the first one at the office, the last to leave. I wake up very early to go to work. I try to do that. Where I am now, I start work at 7, 6 o'clock. 6:05, if I am at my job, I feel disappointed. I try to bring that to me. But there is something, there is accountability. You are the director. You go to work at 10 o'clock and expect your subordinates to be there at 8 o'clock. It doesn't work that way. So we have to develop this culture of accountability. The president cannot be worrying about having Bahali Ajuma at the State House and having meetings that do not make sense, because you go to the State House and what do? I've been to ministers' offices. They just sit there and wait for people to come for meetings. Oh, people are waiting. They are lined up there. So your whole job is nothing to do with what you were appointed to do, but solving other people's problems. So we have to have this culture where, like, listen, I'm the Minister of Youth and Sports. My job is to make sure that sports work. You want the pass from me? This is not the place for it. Come to my house. I don't know how they can afford it anyway. So these are the problems that have been here since the PPP days to now. You go to any ministerial, well, they were all politicians then. Everybody from Kiang would be lined up at BB's office waiting to see him. When will you be able to do some work? And at the end of the day, the growth of this country would be stunted because you'll not be able to do anything. The permanent secretaries, after a while, will also have people who are coming for the pass. So nothing gets done in the country. And the junior officers, you read newspaper, go to Gente, go home, get paid a salary.
permanent secretary also to become corrupt because of the demand on them.
Oh, yes.
Fair demand
That's
on
just
them.
what it is.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to take off from where you just left off. I think here we, at least from my experience, what I've seen, I've been to various government offices, and we work to time as opposed to standards, meaning you have to be at the office at this particular time. You must leave at this particular time. So everybody goes in, sits down, 9 o'clock, and then you leave 4:30 or 4 o'clock. I'm not here for the TRRC, but I'll mention it a little bit. I have a team of about 35 employees that I work with. We don't have times, except for the people that take statements, meaning the investigators and researchers come to work when they want to, and they leave when they want to. But if they have an assignment that's due today at 1,400 hours, I can guarantee you that they will get it done. There's been times when I'll go on Sunday evening, I'll go to work, and I'll find my team there. So if you have ngente or somebody died or whatever it is you need to do, you are free to do that so long as you submit your work on time and within standard. So I think we need to maybe move away a bit from this 9 to 5 type gig and focus more on the standards. As opposed to just saying, okay, come to work at 9 o'clock and leave at 4. They don't do anything. But then if you give them a task and say this is when this is due and it must be turned in by that time and it has to be within this standard, it's a different way of doing business. And so far, it's working well with me. I don't have any problems with absenteeism or people. They can go to Ngente all they want. But if you don't produce the work, then we have a problem. So I don't have those problems right now. Also, the other thing about this capacity, we hear people saying, well, we need capacity, we need capacity. I've been to different government offices here. I think Gambia lacks a lot. But we don't lack in intellectuals and educated people and master's degree holders and bachelor's holders. What we lack is behavioral capacity. So as we go out there and increase or try to change capacity of the people or try to get people to be more qualified for whatever, maybe the behavior is what we need to focus on a little bit more. Our value system is jacked up, if you ask me. And to Dr. Senghor, you had mentioned the youth unemployment as far as security. There are various fault lines within the Gambia that are potential security flashpoints. Youth unemployment is one. This, cleavage within these various ethnic groups, tribalism is another. But these are all things that could all be security concerns. And so when we think about security, we think of it as the physical protection from harm. But it's much more than that, as Dr. Cisse just rightly pointed out. Youth unemployment, tribalism, migration, all these are security issues, and all these are things that when you design a security sector policy, you have to work with the Ministry of Youth and Youth and Sports. You have to work with trade. You have to work with all these other organizations, and so that you can have a more encompassing security sector that's not just focused on uniform services. And I think I've answered your question, I hope, but that's it.
Yeah. My comments relate to the issue of corruption. You know, people have talked about corruption as the reason for having a small salary, for example. I don't think Yahya Jammeh lacked for anything, or Mobutu lacked for anything, but they still kept piling on the billions. So it isn't a question of money per se. I think there are cultural factors that we have to be aware of in the Gambia and have to accept. The institution reflects the cultures of the individuals serving in them. In the final analysis, what's a culture anyway? It's the way people do things. The way Gambians live, the way they relate to each other, the way they solve each other's problems, that is what is reflected in how we work, how we're productive or not productive. Unless that changes, really, we're not going to make a big dent on it. We don't have a growth problem or a development problem. I think our greatest difficulty is we have an innovation problem. A lot of things is concentrated on the government. And a lot of funds are coming in to this country. it is distorting the market. It is distorting the incentives of the individuals working in various institutions. I mean, if money is coming in, I'll be spending it. I will be less concerned about accountability. If somebody's sending me $5,000 a month, I'll have more leisure. I mean, I visited a farm that is receiving some outside assistance. And we were talking to the individual responsible, and he was telling us about how the incentives have been distorted because the farmers are being paid to do work. Now, if I'm paying you to do work, you don't want to finish the work. The trick is to keep working fewer hours as possible and get paid over an extended period of time. What productivity model is that? And that is all over the place. So the private sector, in my view, needs to take a more active part. There is far too much government going on and far too many funds coming in, and nobody is tracking it. Everybody is just spending it.
We'll have Esau, and then after that, I want to wrap up here because we have only 10 minutes now.
Thank you. I'll keep it short. On the issue of corruption, I think it's interesting to talk of it in a broad spectrum, but I want to focus on one aspect of corruption, which is quasi-insidious. It looks okay on paper, and I actually interviewed my good friend there, Coach, some time ago, and he made an interesting revelation. He said to me that people think corruption is just stuffing money in envelopes and sticking it in politicians' hands and walking away and hoping for a favor. He says, no, corruption is when you show up for work late, you're taking away time that you're being paid for. You're taking away food from that child's mouth. And I just want to go a step further. In Britain, and this is publishable, and correct me, you in the UK if I'm wrong, that you can go on the government website, uk.gov, and look at the per diem that the Prime Minister earns on every trip she makes. Now, the British government has aggregated it in such a way. If you go to Kabul, Afghanistan, you're earning £67 a night. If you're Theresa May or you're her shoemaker. If you go to New York, you're earning about £170 a night. Why is it in the Gambia, and this is the fifth wealthiest country on earth, Britain is. Why is it in the Gambia we give politicians £300 a night, even if they go to Dakar, and or they're hangers-on? And the worst thing is, I have actually physically spoken to someone in Kent who told me, boy, I dey come dey. I say, who's are you dey stay? I dey go stay to my boy Gravesend. I dey stay 2 weeks. Me, I no can go for less than 2 weeks. Because you get £300 for every night you spend outside of the Gambia. We're living above our means. This is a country that can ill afford this kind of corruption, and there are real life consequences for this.
I agree. I just want to address a couple of issues raised by Mr. Njai with regards to skills mismatch, and also, I think that was one of the main issues here. We have in this longer version of the paper, we have made references. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. This government has spent tremendous amount of money on consultancies for the civil service, restructuring exercises, staff audits, schemes of services, for each and every individual professional position, there is a job description. What I was suggesting to the government is take all those back, look at it. You can engage local consultants who are very familiar with the service, let them update it, do a restructuring exercise without having to pay any additional cost, money to a foreign an external consultant. It is there. Some of it has been made mention here, but a good part of it is still available for us. So it's not that we don't have it is there. We have compressed, for instance, in the first reform, from it was 21 band grade. We have compressed that to 12. Permanent secretary being grade 12. Then we have also adjusted the band for each of those classifications. So there are information that are available which we can use, provided that of course there is that commitment from the government to do it. So I thought I'll just make mention of that. Now, Yagan. Yes.